Metaphysics and ethics.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. So happiness and intellectual eros, Averroes on metaphysics and ethics. At a critical point in his commentary, long commentary on Aristotle's metaphysics, Lambda 7, which is where Aristotle talks about God, and is the main part of that, Averroes says, the happiness, sa'ada, of man, insofar as he is man, is rather their conjunction with the intellect. That is to say, man's conjunction with the intellect, or women's, but people's. That is a principle of motion and an efficient cause for us. So we get here this notion, this is the, in a way, you could say the crucial text, crucial source text, you could say, for why conjunction, dveikut, hitabkut in Hebrew, itisal in Arabic, is at the center of what it is to be a happy human being. So how does this work? Well, in a sense, it works according to, it's built off of these passages that we find in Aristotle's Metaphysics. Here, this is 1072a, 26 and forward, where we talk about how an unmoved mover and the active intellect or an intellect is going to be an unmoved mover since it does not move itself the way it moves. So the unmoved mover moves in the way that an object of longing or an intelligible moves. It moves without being moved. Right? So you can long for something, you can desire something, you can love something, and you will move, but it does not necessarily have to move. It moves as an object of eros, and he uses this eromenon here. Actually, Aristotle in this discussion uses a number of Greek terms for longing and desire, including orekton, epithumeton, bouleton, and finally here, this eromenon. Now these terms are coming to Arabic also with terms for desire. There's two Arabic translations. One was made by Ustath in the 9th century, and then another one made by Abu Bishr Mata in the 10th century. The second one only includes book Lambda that we have, and it also may be built off of Alexander of Aphrodisias' commentary. So in Ustath's translation, we find that everywhere that Aristotle uses terms for desire, Ustath uses various other terms for desire, including shahwa, shauk, irada, these things. These are terms for desire that he uses, but he reserves the term ishq for the one case, which is the erotic desire, where Aristotle has this eromenon. He uses ma'ashuk for that time. Now, Abu Bishr Mata's translation, on the other hand, which comes a bit later, doesn't use, in fact, any of those terms. It does not use ishq at all. It uses only the other terms, excuse me. The term ishq does not show up. Now, Averroes does two strange things when he uses the term ishq. He does not use it in connection with this passage, where he follows Abu Bishr Mata's translation, though he also probably has access to Ustath's translation. He does not use the term ishq in this passage. He instead inserts it into the commentary on this passage, where Aristotle compares the course of life, the diagoge of the first mover to human beings. So the diagoge of the first mover is such as is best for us for a short time. Now we have this life only for a short time. The first mover has it always, and that's impossible for us. Now during this is commentary on this passage, which in Greek does not use the term eros or any term for desire, Averroes has the following. And this is what we see here in the manuscript of Leiden manuscript, the only surviving manuscript of this text. Now it looks like it's a little bit hard to read it, and that's because the manuscript itself is smudged. So it looks like it says Yachrakul Ashikun El Ma'ashuka. That it moves. It's talking about the unmoved mover, or not unmoved. Excuse me. It's talking about the active intellect. The active intellect moves human beings, moves the human intellect in the way that it looks like it says Ashik El Ma'ashuk, in the way that the Ashik, the erotic desirer, HaChoshek in Hebrew, moves the erotically desired. Now, what's strange about this passage is that it's actually the opposite of what we saw in Aristotle and what is actually preserved fairly well in the translations. So Aristotle seems to have that the erotic desired moves the erotic desirer, right? The unmoved mover is the desired, is the chashuk. But what we have here is actually, it looks like it's saying that the erotic desirer is moving the desired. Excuse me. Wait a second. Nope. Is that on there? Yeah. Okay. So what we have, this Arabic passage that we have there, it comes in the Moses ben Solomon of Salon's revised translation, Hebrew translation of Averroes' long commentary on Aristotle's Metaphysics Lambda 7. I understand that's a lot of complicated ofs in there. He also agrees with what we seem to have in the Arabic text, Shi'aniya ha-choshek l'chashuk, that the choshek, the erotic desirer, moves the erotically desired. However, when we look at the original translation of the long commentary, we find what we would expect to have. Right? Shi'aniya la-choshek he-chashuk. That the erotic he-chashuk, the erotically desired, moves the erotic desirer. Which actually is also similar in a way to what we have in Latin, which is, quote, amatum amans, that the amatum, the beloved, moves the lover. Even though in that case we can see that the Latin translator has not preserved anything specific about eros in that character, unlike the choshek and chashuk of the Hebrew translation. Now the difference in Arabic, of course, is a very small difference between the al and the lil here, right? So it's just whether these lines connect in different ways in there, and you can't really see it very well in the photograph of the manuscript that the librarian in Leiden took for me, but you can see that this is something that could be mistaken in Arabic, in Hebrew, etc. Now I want to suggest that if we follow Averroes' account here, then we will discover that, in fact, the original translation is most likely to be correct, and the Latin as well, and that the other one is presumably the error. And we will also, I think, get a pretty interesting sense of why ishq is important to the diagoge of the human intellect, the course of the life of the human being. Okay. So Aristotle is comparing the divine intellect. He's comparing the motion of the heavens and the heavenly bodies to the motion of the human being in pursuit of the intellect. But there are a number of differences between the way God, the first mover, moves the heavens and the heavenly bodies, and the way the active intellect moves us. Even if both of them can be compared in some sense to the way the beloved moves the lover. And the basis of the distinction is on the basis of, first of all, he makes a distinction between the sensory desires and the bodily desires. So Averroes, like Aristotle, he begins by discussing the desire, the desire, and what it is to desire something, by comparing the desire of the heavenly bodies for the first mover to a kind of desire of the lover for the beloved. But unlike Aristotle, he actually suggests that the lover, that the heavenly bodies themselves are actual lovers of the first mover. They are actually desirers of the first mover, though he does not use the erotic term ishq, which, as I said, he reserves only for the human case. So Averroes begins his discussion of this section by likening the first mover to the embodied soul and saying that it moves, quote, in the manner of pleasant desired things. And he tempers this by distinguishing between sensual desires, which pursue sensory experience and pleasure, and intellectual desires, which pursue the intelligible, the ma'akul, and the beautiful. So these desires are so distinct that they can occasionally be at odds with one another. And so Averroes says that the heavenly bodies are ensouled, but they don't have any faculties of the soul except for intellect and the desiring faculty, which causes motion in place. This motion that they have is, of course, the workings of the cosmos, which cause the generation and the corruption of all the things on earth. Since the heavens don't have any sensory faculties, their motion-causing desires cannot be related to sensory experience or pleasure, and their desire, therefore, must be intellectual. This intellectual desire is determined by a separate mover, which is pure intellect, which moves, which moves the heavens both as a cause of motion and as an end. So it's also important for Averroes to distinguish clearly between intellectual desires, in addition to, so intellectual desires and sensual desires. Excuse me, I lost my place here. He wants to distinguish more clearly between intellectual desires, such as those of the heavens, and desires for sensory experience and pleasure, such as those familiar to all people. In the case of the sensory desire, such as a bath in the hammam, if its form arises in us, or for us, in our soul, we desire it. The form moves us towards the hammam, that is, toward the form that exists outside of our soul. That is, to go to the hammam. Right? So the form of the hammam is the source of motion, and it's also the end of our motion for the bath-goers. But it's not the source of motion and the end of the motion in the same sense. It's the source of motion in the sense that it is an ensouled form. That is to say, it's an immaterial form. You think about the hammam. But an end in the material baths, in which the bathers immerse their external bodies. Contemplating the immaterial form of the hammam is no substitute for the embodied hammam. This is unlike the case of the heavenly bodies, where the source of motion, which is to say the desire for the contemplation of the prime mover, is the same as the end. Right? Because in both cases it's a form, an immaterial form. When the source of motion and the end of the motion is an immaterial form, it's the same. Unlike in the case, say, of this hammam. Another distinction is important for this, which is the distinction between whether things reach their perfection, becoming perfect because of qualities that are in them, or else because of something that exists on its own, outside of them. So in the case of something that is itself an individual thing, if the perfection of one thing is an individual thing, various examples of this are perfection of the master in relation to the slave, and the king in relation to the kingdom, the people of the kingdom. Both of these have a perfection that's not in themselves, it's in someone else. This perfection is achieved through becoming like, Averroes says, the other individual thing. Averroes does not seem to mean that slaves seek to become like their masters, or that citizens strive to become like their kings, or that the opposite would be the case. But rather, he says, all the actions of the slave are directed toward the master and toward his intention. Similarly, the citizens of a single kingdom are moved toward the intention of their king. That is, the slaves and the citizens seek to make themselves and their actions conform to the intentions of their master or king. So they both maintain their individuality even while they are becoming like each other in seeking that perfection, or conforming in their intentions. Now, the heavenly bodies and the intellectually separate first mover are distinct individuals. Commenting on Aristotle's assertion that the first mover moves as an eromenon, Averroes says the first heaven is moved by this mover through a desire, shauk, for it, so that it can become like it as much as it can, just as the lover is moved to become like the beloved. And here he uses mahbub. Averroes thus interprets the love and desire of the first heavens to be a desire for becoming like the first mover. How can the first heaven become like the first mover? Since the first mover is a separate intellect, and both the efficient cause and the final cause of the first heaven, then the first heaven is most like the first mover when it is intellectually contemplating its final cause. So I know that's complicated. Right? But by contemplating the end, it becomes most like that end, because the end is intellect. Intellect, intellecting intellect. So when you intellect, the object of intellection, you are most like that object of intellection, and this is certainly true of the heavens, perhaps more so than of us. So it's realizing its final perfection as well as becoming most like a separate intellect. The heavens are. Okay, but becoming like a separate intellect would not seem to require any motion in place. Why then do the heavens spin? Well, Averroes' answer is somewhat prosaic. The heavens need to preserve their health, he says. So insofar as their bodies, the first heaven presumably needs to exercise to keep in shape. So the good health of the body allows the first heaven to intellect with as few bodily impediments as possible. So the generation and the corruption of the rest of the world follows as a corollary of the first heaven's spinning exercises. Moreover, the movements of the heaven are the catalyst for other divine movements, and etc. That's why other heavens, they desire higher heavens, etc. So, like the case with the heavens, in the case of the human beings, which is supposed to be like that of the heavens in some way, except temporarily, the heavens and the nature then conjoin with, Averroes says, the heavens and nature conjoin with the principle which is intellect in ultimate pleasure, joy, and bliss, like our state in our conjunction with the intellect, which is our principle for a short time. So we become like the heavens in that sense. But Aristotle was comparing the human state to God, and Averroes is comparing the human state to the heavenly state, the state of the celestial being. So there's a difference there. This account brings out the differences between the two forms of conjunction, particularly the eternity of the heavenly case and the temporariness of the human conjunction. The reason for the temporariness of our conjunction turns out to be because it is accomplished through a principle in us. That is, the conjoiner for us is generated and corrupted, while the conjoiner for the heavenly body is eternal. So moreover, in addition to it being where our perfection, human perfection, is in us, and it is also temporary, in another sense, it's also Averroes uses it as an example of the kind of perfection that happens as a quality of human beings. So human beings they reach happiness, he says. Happiness is a quality, a perfection of a quality of what it is to be humans. So this doesn't tell us all that much about ishq in Averroes' metaphysics here. But if we turn to the ethics, I think that we will find what we're looking for. So Averroes discusses ishq, cheshek, in his commentary, his middle commentary on the Nicomachean Ethics, which survives in the 13th century Latin translation by Hermanus Alemanus and a 14th century Hebrew translation by Samuel ben Judah of Marseille. Hermanus did not treat erotic desire or ishq as its own separate concept, but translated by forms of amor, or desiderium, terms he used for other terms for love, etc., philia and orexis as well, probably. But Samuel ben Judah was consistent in translating ishq by the Hebrew cognate of cheshek. Moreover, it is clear that Averroes' concept of erotic desire, ishq, or cheshek, in the context of the ethics, is built off of Aristotle's account of eros. Now, in the context of the Nicomachean Ethics, friendship or love may be among the most necessary things in life, but erotic relationships are an inferior form of love. The erotic or the ishq relationship, the cheshek, is especially inferior to love or friendship among equals. And we have here this statement here about equals. The perfect friendship is the friendship among the good, who are alike in virtue, for these want good things for each other, insofar as each is virtuous. Regarding cheshek, however, ishq, erotic desire, Averroes says, as one kind of love of opposites, we ought to include the love between the erotic desirer and the erotically desired, and between the beautiful and the ugly. But while the ugly may love the beautiful because of its beauty, the beautiful will not love the ugly because of its ugliness. Hence it appears that erotic desirers are worthy of scorn because they want to be loved at some time. This is a rather negative view. It's characterized by imbalance. The desirer is ugly, the desired beautiful, and so the desirer is worthy of scorn. Averroes' formulation emphasizes the imbalance even beyond Aristotle's words, whereas in love among equals, both parties pursue the good. In the erotic relationship, the desirer pursues beauty, but the desired does not. Averroes describes in more detail what both sides of the erotic relationship pursue earlier in book 8. Each one takes pleasure in the other, but their pleasure is in two different things. For the erotic desirer takes pleasure in the form of the erotically desired, and I've put that in emphasis there. That's an addition that he makes. And so the erotic desirer takes pleasure in the form of the erotically desired, and the erotically desired takes pleasure in the work the erotic desirer does for him. This apprehension of the form has its roots in sense perception, and Averroes tells elsewhere that the beginning of love is enjoyment of the senses. I mean that love that is prior by nature through the love of the erotic desirer. So erotic desire actually begins in the senses. For one will not erotically desire if he does not first enjoy a sight. And one will not erotically desire that in which he enjoys taking pleasure, then when he is afflicted by separation from it and desires to draw near to it. Averroes' account of erotic desire thus has three components. 1, sensory experience as a precondition. 2, taking pleasure in the form of the erotically desired. And 3, being afflicted by the absence of the erotically desired and desiring to draw near to it. Now this does not necessarily imply that the sensory apprehension that leads to erotic desire is the apprehension of the erotically desired. It is conceivable that the future erotic desirer can build off of the senses to construct a form. Having not seen or sensed this form, the erotic desire is afflicted by its absence and strives to draw near to it. Such an account could be applied to separate forms, such as the active intellect. A philosopher, for example, could study natural science, come to the conclusion that there are separate intellects, or even that there is an active intellect, and then erotically desire that form which is in some sense removed from the philosopher. In such a case, the form of the active intellect is both the source of motion of the philosopher's erotic desire and its end. Now I'm getting to the conclusion here. I know I'm running late, but I'm the organizers. We are now in a position to understand Averroes' use of ishq in the long commentary on the metaphysics. The hierarchical imbalance between the beautiful, erotically desired, and the ugly, erotic desirer precludes the possibility that the active intellect is the erotic desirer, right? That's the choshek, that's moving the chashuk, and we humans are the erotically desired, the chashuk. Moreover, the notion that erotic desire takes sense perception as a precondition also suggests that humans, rather than the active intellect, are the erotic desirers. Indeed, sensory desire as a precondition also explains why ishq is not attributed to the heavenly spheres or active intellect, neither of which has sensory experiences. Moreover, unlike the relationship between equals, or even between those who strive for similarity of purpose, as we saw, such as the masters or slaves, or the kings or people, or the celestial heavens and God, the erotic relationship includes no striving for similarity. The erotic desirer strives only to grasp an absent form, an act far removed from becoming like something else. Insofar as erotic desire is a kind of perfection, then, the erotic desirer does not move toward an external goal. Rather, he perfects himself as an erotic desirer, that is, through perfecting himself. Thus, the account of erotic desire in the middle commentary on the Nicomachean Ethics gives us an explanation of how the active intellect can be a separate, efficient, and final cause, and at the same time be a perfection of a human quality, and not an individual thing outside of the human. It is then a perfect example of how human happiness in conjunction with the active intellect differs in character from the heavenly perfection and heavenly conjunctions. Moreover, insofar as this erotic desire disappears, once the form of the erotically desired is no longer enjoyed, it is clear why human metaphysical happiness is temporary, unlike that of the heavens. And I'll just point out that in the Ethics, Averroes also describes that somebody who really has a knowledge of God, or knowledge of the prime mover, has some kind of knowledge that is beyond what human beings can gain. And I think from there it is possible to infer that the kind of knowledge that human beings can gain through the study of metaphysics is comparable, according to Averroes, to ishq, to this kind of imperfect love, cheshek, desire for something that is absent, that cannot perfectly be grasped. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much. We have time for a question or two if you'd like. Yes. All right, maybe we'll save that for the break, because we're about to take a break, and we only have like 2 minutes. So we're going to take a break 2 minutes early, but, and I want to tell everyone this, in about half an hour we're going to come back here. We're going to have some personal reflections from Professor Meir and myself, and we're going to have a surprise also. So I'm going to leave it at that.